Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me tonight is going to be Robert Macklin. And he has a book out. I'm not sure exactly when it came out. I didn't look at the date. Called The Jesus Delusion. And we're going to talk about that some. But before we get through, there was another book that he has recently come out with that he's asked me to mention that it's not exactly 100% on the paranormal, but it's still a very interesting book nonetheless. And I want to say, if I remember correctly from the last time I talked to him, that although it wasn't exactly paranormal, it might have had some link to it, or to some degree. I'll let him correct me on that if I'm wrong. The thing is, though, I can't remember the title. He told me like last week, and I hadn't had a chance to go to his site today and refresh my memory. Robert, I hate to ask you this, but can you tell me the name of that other book?
Yeah, surely, Royce. It's called Sniper Elite, and it is really very, very little to do with paranormal. It's about Australia's greatest sniper in the Special Forces who was in Afghanistan, and it's the story of his life, which is a truly fascinating one, and it's come out in America as Sniper Elite.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here. I looked into the chat room there because I thought somebody said they couldn't hear, and I was trying to see if that's what it was because somebody else said they did hear. But getting back to the topic at hand, we can get to that book in just a little while and, tell everybody a little something about that. But for now, why don't you tell everybody exactly, what got you started doing books and films? Because I understand from your website you do films, and how you got into the Jesus Delusion and, what led you to write the book. Kind of give them an idea of where you're coming from.
Oh, I see. Well, Royce, I guess I'm one of those people who was cursed almost from birth with this almost fantastic sense of curiosity about the world. And so I've now written 21 books, all of which are either biographies or histories, but they're explorations of the world and in all its wonder. And an essential element of that is the religious and paranormal side of the world. And I was brought up as a Methodist in my home state of Queensland in Australia. And I was always fascinated by the character at the center of the Christian religion, Jesus of Nazareth. And so when I developed my expertise at writing and research and at biography, I set to go to the original documents, the Gospels and so on, and to write for my sons, really, initially, the real story, as I saw it, of this character, this man, this figure at the center of the Christian religion. And that's the background to the Jesus Delusion, because I came to the conclusion that there were two delusions involved. One was the delusion that Jesus himself had, and we can go into that in some detail, but the other is the delusion that so many other people have from very different elements of Christianity, be it the Catholics or the Southern Baptists or the Methodists or even the Mormons, that they all seem to feel that they know the one and only figure, the one and only Jesus. And since they're all quite different in their conception, they can't all be right.
That's true.
That's the background to my thinking.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And, I was unaware of your, religious affiliation before. I myself used to be a Pentecostal Sunday school teacher, and my dad, goodness knows, was a preacher. And actually, me and him never saw eye to eye either.
Right.
Now,
Yes.
I left the church and I've gotten more into the Hermetic tradition and into alchemy, Gnosticism. I think those paths, at least to my way of thinking, make more sense to me. They seem to, resonate more with me. That doesn't mean I'm right, but at least I'm following my own heart, my own conscience, in other words.
That's correct. And Gnosticism is a very old belief. It was certainly around at the time of Jesus of Nazareth. And in fact, the Gospels show a lot of influence from the Gnostics, particularly the Gospel of John. But it just seems to me that the essence of what the Gospels tell us is that Jesus of Nazareth had this delusion, had this belief that he had a very special father-son relationship with the Jewish God, his Jewish God of the day, and he believed that if he followed the prescripts of Isaiah and offered himself as a sacrifice, then the terrible situation that the Jews were in at the time, under the heel of Rome and governed by the Herods, would suddenly be lifted, and the world as we knew it, the human world, would be changed into a kind of heavenly world where he and his disciples, including his good friend Judas, would be set up as the judges of the good and the evil. And that seemed to me to be quite an extraordinary delusion. If it had happened, it would have been even more extraordinary. But what did occur was that at the time when he was expecting it to occur, nothing did happen. And that cry that he made from the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" I think has kind of echoed down the years as being one of awful despair when the delusion fell away and he was faced with a terrible death.
Yeah, indeed he was. I mean, nobody wants to die that kind of death. But
no, and you'd be pretty extraordinary kind of a God or Father who would wish that upon a son, I would have thought. But and indeed, I sometimes think, why a son? Why not a daughter? What was so special about a son rather than a female child? So there are so many elements in this that I found fascinating, and the essential delusion at the heart of it seems to me to be something really well worth our exploration.
Okay. Now, in the chat room, Leslie was saying, wanting to know, did you give your religious association and he missed it somehow? Now, I remember you saying Methodist, but what I wasn't clear of at the time, was that a past Methodist, or are you still presently a Methodist?
No, I'm not a Methodist now. What I am now is a skeptic of all things. I'm a quester after the truth, and I have the feeling that I will probably die before I discover what the truth is, and I don't mind that. I think we're all embarked in this extraordinary exploration of the world, and I don't know that we're going to find all the answers before I depart the scene. But I don't mind that. I think what's wonderful is that we're all explorers, and the way in which we do our exploration, I think, sets us up to be a very fascinating and progressive civilization.
Yes. Well, okay, also, before we go any further, and I forget, I want to mention, everybody, you can learn a lot more about him and his other books, as well as the Jesus Delusion, because he's written quite a few, at www.robertmacklin.com. And also, at the bottom of his description, underneath the showroom here, I got the Jesus Delusion linked over to Amazon for if anybody that's interested. I ain't gonna kid you, I do get a commission if anybody clicks on it from here. But hey, I'm being honest.
Very good.
I was also going to come around to, because you said something a minute ago that really kind of got me to thinking about Jesus when you mentioned the fact, why wasn't it a son, why wasn't a daughter? But right before that, when you were questioning what kind of father offers up his son, I wanted to kind of elaborate on that. I mean, I'm thinking that the listeners, if they want to think about it and they want to walk a mile in the Almighty's shoes and think like he would think, even though they're not him, I'm not saying be God, but I'm just saying for just a little while, put yourself in his shoes. And let's say you saw the rest of the world around you in your whole neighborhood or your block was drug users. Would you say, hey, let me sacrifice my son so that these people can go to heaven and they never have to quit using drugs, or all they have to do is promise or say they believe in my son's name? I'm pretty sure that you, Robert, would have to admit that's a very legitimate question, wouldn't you?
I sure would. In fact, if I came across a person who chose to sacrifice his son, I'd run a mile rather than join his belief system. It just wouldn't make any kind of sense to me. But what I find though is it's very interesting. We don't think. I'm quite sure that there are gods walking or demigods walking around the world today, and there certainly weren't last week and last year. But we somehow, as the distance gets further away, we're more and more prepared to think that that there were such things as gods and demigods inhabiting the earth. And that does seem to me to be quite a strange kind of attitude to take. Understandable, because we all would love it if it were true. If we really could live forever after we died in some blissful state. But I rather think that the wish is father of the belief, and we find there's more and more. Whatever religion you look at, they all seem to offer some special reward, and gosh, you couldn't get a bigger reward than being able to live in a blissful eternity, could you?
That is true. And listen, while you were speaking, Leslie made a mention. It wasn't really a question, but it was still something I thought should be brought to the table, because I think it relates, in a sense, at least. And that is, he was mentioning about the long relationship of Abraham and how he was told to sacrifice Isaac. And I think that should be laid on the table too, because, well, it's a parallel, God sacrificing like Abraham would have been sacrificing. And I was wondering if you had any, feedback on that, any opinions about that.
Yes, I do, Royce. I remember when I was at Sunday school being taught that, and I still have the picture in my mind of the little book that the story was in, and they're on a little mountain. Abraham and Isaac are on this little mountain, and he's bared the throat of the boy, and he's raised a dagger to kill him. And I just thought, oh my gosh, what a terrible, terrible thing to ask a person to do. I remember even, I must have been no more than 7 or 8 years old, but I can still see that ghastly, dreadful picture in my mind.
Well, you know what? While you was explaining that part, Leslie was responding to what I told him in the chat room, because I had told him I often wondered about that, what he had said about Abraham, as far as taking it on face value. His response was, either way, metaphorical or actuality, the storyline parallels. I thought that was pretty unique, because I was just saying that while he was typing it.
Really? Yes. Yeah, that is interesting. The other parallel for Jesus was the story of Isaiah, who spoke of being the sacrificial lamb. And this whole idea of the sacrificial lamb runs right through the Jewish religion of which Jesus was a part at that time. So it is probably not unusual, or it flows logically from those beliefs that he should have seen himself as a sacrificial lamb to the slaughter, and that's what impelled him to believe that if he did follow through with that idea, that suddenly the world would change. But alas, we're still waiting for the world to change. Royce, I think we'll be waiting for a long time.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be a long time. But I was going to also, let's see, where was I at? I was going to ask you exactly what is it that led you to, not led you, but what do you suppose led Jesus to believe that he was going to be the Messiah and not John the Baptist or his father Joseph or one of his brothers or James the Just? Or what do you suppose he led him to, what brought him under this illusion, in other words?
Well, I do go into this in some great length in the book, and it goes right back to his childhood and his birth. The scandal, in fact, that according to the Bible surrounded his birth. This idea of this virgin who goes away and comes back pregnant to her betrothed, and then has this child. There are many other kind of explanations around that. I mean, the Jewish Mishnah suggests that she was sexually attacked by a Roman soldier named Pampira at the time, and that it was an unwanted birth. But all we do know for sure is that there was some kind of scandal surrounding his birth, and that's according to the Gospels. And we also know that somehow or other the father figure Joseph passes out of the story very early in the piece, and I have the feeling from reading very carefully the Gospels that Jesus felt the need, a terrible inner need, for a father figure, and he devolved that need upon his God, his God of the day, and so it was. He always speaks of God as his father, and so it was to his father that he was prepared to make this great personal sacrifice.
So, from what I'm hearing here, that you do believe that Jesus, in his heart, in all sincerity, really did believe this. It's just that you have reason to believe he believed something that was not a real reality. He believed, what he had reason for believing at the time.
That's right. See, I think he was absolutely the most sincere, honest person, with a great heart and a wonderful love of his fellow man. But I think that he was sadly deluded and the evidence, as I've said, is that while he organized for himself through his friend Judas to be taken and to be crucified. When he was crucified, that was when he expected everything to change, for his God to intervene in the world, and it is that cry that I spoke of earlier that signals his despair that it did not happen.
Well, I tell you what, if you realized on the cross in all of that pain that all was for naught, that would have to be, at least in my opinion, one of the most despairing moments in almost anybody's life. What do you think? I
think not only in anyone's life, I think in the life of the world, because so many people have been attracted to this story, and yet they really don't go into it in the kind of depth that you would expect. And part of the reason for that is, I think, the churches, for their own reasons, they've all developed a sort of special figure of this character at the center of the religion, and so you're not supposed really to inquire. You're only supposed to take, the given truth from the pulpit, and this is a sad thing. I rather feel that in recent years, people have become more questioning on these matters, and I reckon that's a good thing too. It doesn't mean that it's the end of Christianity. It means probably that there'll be a more enlightened way of our understanding of this great figure at the center of the church.
Yeah, now this is something I'm glad you're making a point of right here, is that irregardless of whether you're right or wrong, whether he was delusioned or not, is totally irrelevant of the fact that his work for world peace was probably more than any person on the planet, maybe next to Gandhi or maybe even over his, at least I would think, wouldn't you?
Yes, although the world, of course, was a very different place for him at that time. I mean, it was really confined only to what we now know as Israel, but was then Palestine. The world for him was one of terrible oppression from the Roman Empire and from the Herod the king and his sons, who were not of the same faith. And so, the Jews of the day were desperately oppressed, and Jesus was one of them. So his world was fairly constricted by comparison with the kind of world that you and I are now able to connect with. My goodness, here's you and me talking across the whole globe, and so our perceptions of the world are so different from that of the people of 2,000 years ago.
Okay. Now, also, while we're talking about 2,000 years ago, one of the things that also you was touching bases on earlier, which I don't know if this is part of your book or not, was about the Gnostic Church and its, how far back in time it goes, because it was really around some 300 odd years before the Catholic Church was around. The church at Jerusalem was around during that time, and long before the the Catholic Church sprang up, you had the Gnostics, you had the Cathars, you had the church at Jerusalem. There was all kinds of them, and it's just a matter that the Catholic Church won out. And I was wondering, have you ever wondered, why did the Catholic Church that come along 300 years later win out over the ones that were actually there at the beginning?
Well, yes, I have. And I'm sure I know the reason. Well, I think I know the reason. The Gnostics and others, they had only a very mystical literature. They genuinely believed that an individual did not need an intermediary between himself and God, and you could become a person of knowledge, of Gnosticism, directly. Whereas the Catholic Church said you could only find salvation through the Church, and you must find salvation through what the Church believes. And the Church believed in a genuine biography of Jesus, and so they promoted that human biography of Jesus, which was virtually which was not part of the Gnostic system. The Gnostic system took a much more mystical view of the character of Jesus, and spoke basically only about his spirit, as opposed to the man himself. And that was why, really one of the reasons why I decided I should examine who is this man that the Catholic Church has been promoting through the Gospels, as opposed to the mystic, spiritual figure that is promoted by the Gnostics.
Okay. Now, while you were doing that, you got a question in the chat room. Actually, he said this twice, but one day, the second time was worded a little different. I don't know if he wants these answered separately or if he was just correcting himself. But he wants to know, do we need to be redeemed? And then the second time, he asked, do we need to be redeemed today? So maybe you could just answer both.
Right. Redeemed from what? Does he mean the original sin? Because that's a tough one for me to actually accept. I'm sure that I've done a lot of, unpleasant things to my fellow man, but I don't feel the need to be redeemed in the same way that I think that your questioner is asking. I think that redemption is something we should follow every day with our fellow man. I'm not inclined to think that that it's a spiritual ritual that we should go through once in a lifetime or once a week at prayer or confession. I think we should redeem ourselves in the eyes of our fellow human beings every time we do them wrong.
Okay. He was clarifying in there. He said from being sinners, and then he said from our imperfect treatments of others. And now I just asked him if he meant imperfect nature, and he said yes, he meant imperfect nature, which would be different from original sin because our imperfect nature would belong to us today.
Yeah, but who decides what's perfect and what's imperfect? It all depends really on your point of view, Royce. What some people think is perfect, others think. One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. A lot depends upon your point of view in these matters, and all I feel is that if I have not been done the right thing by my fellow man, then it is to that fellow man that I require to redeem myself.
Okay, so that leads me. Now, this ain't coming from the chat room this time, because I can't help but wonder, where would your stand on this redemption issue lie between, say, like, for example, you and God yourself? Do you feel like there's any area, for example, you might have fallen short of God's goal that you think you should be redeemed from, and that if other people, they see this, they should do so as well?
No, I never impose that upon other people, Royce. I'm very wary of organized religion. Like you, I'm much more interested in the personal relationship that I might have in my thoughts and spirituality. I do get troubled. I'm not a joiner. Not too many writers I know are. I don't join a political party. I don't join a church. I tend really to have my own opinions and to work out my own personal and social salvation on my own and with my dear and loving family.
And then as far as your fellow man goes, that's between them and God.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I certainly wouldn't try to impose my will upon them, and I wouldn't expect them to do the same to me.
Well, that's good. I like that posture, or that position, should I say. Now, also, James was saying, why should we have to be redeemed? The concept of sin is God's fault. Sin didn't enter the world until God created Satan. being all-knowing, God would have known Satan would have brought sin into the world, which makes God responsible for sin. Why should we have to be judged and redeemed and not God because of sin? God's creation through Satan put this, and then he said, put this to your guest.
Yeah, and it's a very good point. It's the same kind of point, really, that I've drawn very, very clearly in the Jesus Delusion, and that is his relationship with Judas, where the traditional view is that he was a betrayer. But you can't have a betrayer if the person wants to be betrayed. It is no betrayal if Jesus knew, and of course he did, that Judas, his friend, would be doing the sorts of things he wanted him to do so that the crucifixion would take place. That he would tell the priests and the soldiers where to find him in the garden. That he would be the one who helped to organize that. And so exactly the same paradox that your chat room person has raised, I approach and I argue in the Jesus Delusion. And I think it's a very, very important element for us all to consider. I mean, this poor fellow, Judas, has come down through history as the quintessential betrayer, the traitor. But really, surely no Christian believes that Jesus didn't know what he was about in organizing to have Judas in his team to do this job. And it was Jesus, you'll remember, who said that it would be the 12 who would be the judges of Israel after his death, and the 12 included Judas. I mean, he really was very close to Jesus. He was the treasurer of the operation, and I think that they worked very closely together, and I don't believe that some of the other disciples knew what they were doing together. And this is what leaders do. They don't tell all of their disciples everything that they know. They select some for some purposes and some for some others, but they don't tell all of them everything. And if you look right through the whole annals of leadership, be it political or religious, you always find that the man at the center decides who will know what. And I think the Judas question is one of the really interesting keys to unlock the genuine personality of Jesus of Nazareth.
Okay. Now, me personally, I never really thought that God brought sin into the world. However, there are some people that do, and from my personal perspective, again, that's another issue that's between the individual and God. And I've often had a belief that if God wanted somebody to know something, well, he's got the ability to tell them. I don't have to. Unless they're not listening, and maybe I'm not listening is why he hadn't told me.
That's right. Sometimes the best thing to do is to stop talking and start listening.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, Robert, I'm a father of 3 boys. And the youngest one is 17, be getting out of high school next year. And I've always told them, there is no way you can be running your transmitters and your receivers be receiving at the same time. You got to turn one off to use the other.
Yes. And of course you realize, that the 17-year-olds, their profession is not to listen to Dad.
Okay. Now, Leslie was asking, how can Judas be blamed for doing what Jesus wanted him to?
Exactly. That's my point. That's exactly my point. He or she got it exactly right.
Okay. Now, also, I want to make sure, and we may come back to this, especially if some people ask some questions, but we've been going for a little while, and I want to make sure we don't forget to come back to your book. But before we do, your new book, why don't you kind of give everybody a summary. Pardon me. I'm sorry, I tried to catch the mute button, but he hit me in mid-sentence, and I wasn't able to get to it in time. I was going to say, why don't you tell everybody a little something about the Jesus delusion? I mean, because I know it's probably got more in it than just, the part about Jesus and him dying on the cross, and how, at least you believe that he died in vain. But I'm sure you got more in it than that, and kind of tell everybody a little something about what it's about.
Well, it's one of the things that I have learned in my 70 years is all the arts of research and writing of biography. My biography of Jesus joins 7 or 8 other biographies, most recently that of our former Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, and I'm his official biographer. So I sought to bring all of my expertise to the task of writing, appreciating, and then writing the story, the biography of Jesus. And I used the original sources and secondary sources and a capacity for insight that took me 7 years in total to bring the thing to fruition. And so it begins at the beginning of his life, or well before actually. It sets the historical scene, then tells the story of his life, and then talks a little bit about what happened thereafter in the development of the church. So that's in essence the story of the Jesus delusion. And it's something that I feel is just about at the right time for us now in our development to be able to look at without becoming angry and setting up fatwas against me and all that sort of thing. I think this is the time when we really can start to explore these things logically and with an open heart.
Okay. Well, since I see we're already 37 minutes into this, why don't we move ahead to the book about the sniper and tell us a little something. You already told us a little earlier, but since you said that, we've had some more people come in, and we'll see what we can get out about that book as well.
Well, this was a very interesting exercise, Royce, because when our top Special Forces sniper, a man named Rob Macklin, came back from Afghanistan and decided he was going to leave the army, retire to be with his family. He came to me to ask me to tell his story, and I decided after a long series of discussions with him to tell the story from his point of view, totally from his point of view, which really meant I needed to write it in the first person as though I were he. And so I really had to, in a sense, become him. I had to get to know him so well that I was able to write it believably from the first person, from his point of view, through his eyes and through his words. And it has been a most extraordinary experience because it just hit the Australian bookshops like an atom bomb, and for a year now, it's been our top bestseller in that category, in that field. And this meant that fortunately, an American publisher, St. Martin's Press, saw its value in the United States and bought the rights to it, and changed the name from SAS Sniper, which is in Australia Special Air Services, which is the equivalent of Delta Force. But you don't have SAS in America, you have Delta Force. So in the American version, the title is Sniper Elite, and it tells the story of what it's like to be, what it's like to become and then to be a sniper in Afghanistan, fighting the bad guys, from the very point of view of the man at the end of the gun.
Okay, so it sounds to me, though, like you kind of, during the course of walking in this guy's shoes for the purpose of the story, you become like a one with him almost on some kind of a level there, didn't you?
Absolutely. It's really strange. We're now very good friends. You know, we're good mates. He lives about 1,000 kilometers away from me, but we see, you know, a fair bit of each other. He's got a lovely family, and when they come down, they stay with us and so on. But it's strange. The kind of relationship you develop is very close, because you know, I know what he's going to say almost before he says it now. But strangely enough, because it's been such a terrific success, another of our top Special Forces people has now come to me and wants to do something very similar. He's retiring after 28 years in the SAS, in the equivalent of Delta Force. So that's going to be another interesting exercise for next year.
So now in this book, are you giving people a real inside look into the way the Special Forces over there really truly work, aside from the media, you know, dressings, in other words? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Not a touch of the media nonsense. And, absolutely, it's straight from the shoulder, this one.
It sounds like it's a pretty hard-hitting book that gets down to the nitty-gritty on just exactly how tough life is on one of these here missions.
Oh, absolutely, Royce. It's tough indeed, and he was caught in the biggest ambush that the Taliban laid out on a unit of an American and Australian team working together. They caught them on three sides, shooting from the green, down from the hills, and behind them as well. And boy, oh boy, that was a shocker, because my guy got badly wounded. There was his colleagues won the equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor. There were a number of Americans injured and killed, and it was in fact an American radio guy in Rob Mailer's, that's my man, in his vehicle, that was able to call in the air cover and get him out of there. And my guy spent an hour while under blistering fire protecting the American JTAC, they're called, but wireless operator, with his body and his expertise.
Well, I got to tell you, it's really impressive for somebody to be in a situation like that and come home and live and tell the story for somebody else to write it down. And I think you're honored to be able to get this thing down and out in that guy's lifetime while he can still appreciate the work you've done.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I feel honored. Yeah, I feel really privileged at having been able to do this, and apparently, you know, it's good enough so that another of these incredible men has come to me asking me to do the same thing for him.
Okay. Now, Leslie was in the chat room. This ain't a question. Said that he's blank on this topic. It's not a topic he loves a lot about. I told him, me too. I started to say I'm just winging it, and you end it right there, so I thought I'd just say it live. I'm just winging it. Remember, I told you before I began it that, well, yes, I'm an ex-Marine, but I was only in for like a year and a half, so I was never in Special Forces to, you know, actually experience it, and I never personally knew anybody in Special Forces to, you know, get a first-hand account like you did. So, it'd leave me kind of blank, in other words. But, yeah, I told him I just thought I'd tell him real quick. I'm winging this one. But, how long ago when did he come home exactly?
Beginning of last year.
So he's only been home for about 1 year now.
That's right, yeah.
Well, actually, he's a really pretty lucky guy. And about roughly how old is he?
He's 42.
42?
Yeah.
Well, that's a very fortunate thing. I mean, especially if he didn't lose any limbs or use of any limbs or anything like that he comes back from a situation like that and still able to maintain, like, hold a job or, go to the mall or enjoy his life, in other words.
Absolutely. In fact, he's coming over to America shortly to compete in the big, sniper competition in Utah.
Oh, okay. Now, I never heard of that competition, but there was one time that there was a air show going on TV that I swear to God, these guys were up there making a heart shape with their airplanes, and one guy decided to use his airplane to put the arrow through the thing, and I sat there and watched him fly right into two of those airplanes and blow them up right during the show.
Gosh, how dreadful, yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, it is dreadful, and I'm kind of laughing about the thing because, what was really funny about it was I was on the phone with my friend Larry, and I went, golly, did you just see that? Because we were talking about it. I knew he was watching it. He said they didn't try to put that guy didn't try to do that with the arrow. I said, don't believe me, go back and do that in slow motion. He went back and he said, I'll be a son of a gun.
Royce, we got a heck of a thing happening here at the moment. I mentioned my Kevin Rudd, our Prime Minister, former Prime Minister. He's challenged the current Prime Minister. He wants his job back, and so I'm getting lots and lots of calls. So would you mind if I cut it fairly short from here on?
Sure. As a matter of fact, we can go ahead and wrap this show a little early. And I ask you one little favor. Of course, you can always say no, but would you mind coming back in the future and we can go further into detail? Because I'm really enjoying talking to you.
Sure, Royce, no problem at all. I'd be more than happy to.
Okay, well then, you have a good night, and I want to thank you for being on the show. And everybody here heard what you said, so they know why you're, having to cut your end of it short. And good luck to you with your situation over there, and we'll talk at you later.
Thanks, mate. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Okay, well, it doesn't sound like everything disconnected. Can y'all hold on a minute? Okay. Let me test and make sure y'all can still hear me. Okay. According to my broadcaster, y'all can. Can somebody type in the chat room and let me know y'all can still hear me speaking, please? I want to make sure I didn't accidentally disconnect the show. Okay, thanks, Leslie. I really appreciate that. I wanted to say real quick before I wrapped up on my end that, again, this Saturday we're having the last show of February, and it's going to be How the Bible Reveals Reincarnation with Captain Larry Edward Van Hoos. And that's this Saturday at 1 p.m. And I've been reading his book. I got a Kindle thing on it. And, well, quite frankly, he's covered some stuff in it that I hadn't thought about, and I hadn't seen few covered. And some of it's information I knew about, but I hadn't heard it covered from his angle. And y'all might want to be here to hear that. And about the feedback a minute ago, evidently, when Robert hung up, it created a feedback coming from his end, because when I hung up his phone on my end, the feedback went away, so I feel sure that's probably what caused it. But at any rate, I did want to let y'all know about this Saturday's show, and I wanted to remind y'all to stop by United Paranormal International. It's a great place to be. as far as having a social network and a place to share and a place to learn. And I want to thank all of you guys for coming. If you ask questions, don't ask questions, you're still participating either way. And I wouldn't be up here talking if I was just talking to the air. Got to have listeners, and I really do appreciate y'all every bit as much as I do the guests. And do want to thank y'all for coming by to stop by and see me. I'll be putting this in the archive tomorrow. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up since he's already left. Okay. I'm sorry, I stopped to read what James said. It'll be in the archives, James, as I've already told you. Just won't be there to ask questions. Sorry. But at any rate, I want to thank y'all for coming. I want to thank Heidi. It's the first time I've seen her since I've been here on my own site. I believe I remember seeing her over at Blog Talk when I was still there. And I'm glad to see she's over here with me now, and I hope to see her more often. And I hope to see you guys there. And please don't forget to let people know if you like my show, pass it around. I'm pretty sure if y'all like it, other people will like it as well. And y'all go ahead and y'all have yourself a wonderful night. And I'll start prepping tomorrow for the archives and for my next show. Y'all be good and I'll be real. Good night, everybody.
His good friend Judas would be set up as the judges of the good and the evil, and that seemed to me to be quite an extraordinary delusion. If it had happened, it would have been even more extraordinary. But what did occur was that at the time when he was expecting it to occur, nothing did happen, and that cry that he made from the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" I think has kind of echoed down the years as being one of awful despair when the delusion fell away and he was faced with a terrible death.
Yeah, indeed he was. I mean, nobody wants to die that kind of death. But
no, and you'd be pretty extraordinary kind of a God or Father who would wish that upon a son, I would have thought. But and indeed, I sometimes think, why a son? Why not a daughter? What was so special about a son rather than a female child? So there are so many elements in this that I found fascinating, and the essential delusion at the heart of it seems to me to be something really well worth our exploration.
Okay. Now, in the chat room, Leslie was saying, wanting to know, did you give your religious association, and he missed it some?
And so when I developed my expertise at writing and research and at biography, I set to go to the original documents, the Gospels and so on, and to write for my sons, really, initially, the real story, as I saw it, of this character, this man, this figure at the center of the Christian religion. And that's the background to the Jesus delusion, because I came to the conclusion that there were two delusions involved. One was the delusion that Jesus himself had, and we can go into that in some detail, but the other is the delusion that so many other people have from very different elements of Christianity, be it the Catholics or the Southern Baptists or the Methodists or even the Mormons, that they all seem to feel that they know the one and only figure, the one and only Jesus. And since they're all quite different in their conception, they can't all be right.
That's true.
That's the background to my thinking.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I was unaware of your religious affiliation before. I myself used to be a Pentecostal Sunday school teacher, and my dad, goodness knows, was a preacher. And actually, me and him never saw eye to eye either.
Right.
Now,
yes.
I left the church, and I've gotten more into the Hermetic tradition and into alchemy, Gnosticism. I think those paths, at least to my way of thinking, make more sense to me. They seem to, resonate more with me. That doesn't mean I'm right, but at least I'm following my own heart, my own conscience, in other words.
That's correct. And Gnosticism is a very old belief. It was certainly around at the time of Jesus of Nazareth. And in fact, the Gospels show a lot of influence from the Gnostics, particularly the Gospel of John. But it just seems to me that the essence of what the Gospels tell us is that Jesus of Nazareth had this delusion, had this belief that he had a very special father-son relationship with the Jewish God, his Jewish God of the day, and he believed that if he followed the prescripts of Isaiah and offered himself as a sacrifice, then the terrible situation that the Jews were in at the time, under the heel of Rome and governed by the Herods, would suddenly be lifted, and the world as we knew it, the human world, would be changed into a kind of heavenly world where he and his disciples, including in America as Sniper Elite.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here. I looked into the chat room there because I thought somebody said they couldn't hear, and I was trying to see if that's what it was because somebody else said they did hear. But getting back to the topic at hand, we can get to that book in just a little while and, tell everybody a little something about that. But for now, why don't you tell everybody exactly, what got you started doing books and films? Because I understand from your website you do films, and how you got into the Jesus Delusion and, what led you to write the book. Kind of give them an idea of where you're coming from.
Oh, I see. Well, Royce, I guess I'm one of those people who was cursed almost from birth with this almost fantastic sense of curiosity about the world. And so I've now written 21 books, all of which are either biographies or histories, but they're explorations of the world and in all its wonder. And an essential element of that is the religious and paranormal side of the world. And I was brought up as a Methodist in my home state of Queensland in Australia. And I was always fascinated by the character at the center of the Christian religion, Jesus of Nazareth.
Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me tonight is going to be Robert Macklin. And he has a book out. I'm not sure exactly when it came out. I didn't look at the date. Called The Jesus Delusion. And we're going to talk about that some. But before we get through, there was another book that he has recently come out with that he's asked me to mention that it's not exactly 100% on the paranormal, but it's still a very interesting book nonetheless. And I want to say, if I remember correctly from the last time I talked to him, that although it wasn't exactly paranormal, it might have had some link to it, or to some degree. I'll let him correct me on that if I'm wrong. The thing is, though, I can't remember the title. He told me like last week, and I hadn't had a chance to go to his site today and refresh my memory. Robert, I hate to ask you this, but can you tell me the name of that other book?
Yeah, surely, Royce. It's called Sniper Elite, and it is really very, very little to do with paranormal. It's about Australia's greatest sniper in the Special Forces who was in Afghanistan, and it's the story of his life, which is a truly fascinating one, and it's come out